Rest in peace, Brian Wilson. I have to say, I have to talk about it. I'm not going to really I'm not getting into any news now. The rest of the show is just going to be tribute to Brian. Other than, oldies radio and stuff when I was a kid, I was never exposed to the Beach Boys growing up. Nobody in my family were Beach Boys fans. So I didn't have any reference point for that at all. And in the mid-'90s, I had a friend. He started asking me about the Beach Boys, and I was just like, I come from, I'm a guitar rock guy. And he starts asking, hey, you listen to the Beach Boys? I'm like, Beach Boys? This is like, hardcore grunge alternative days. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Listening to the Beach Boys? I don't listen to that old fucking dinosaur shit. What the fuck are you talking about? He said, oh, they're fucking awesome, man. They're the best. And I was like, whatever, dude. And then I actually started getting into them, listening to them, and listening to some of their non-surfing stuff, and went, wow. And then I went with my friend and his parents. This had to be, 1996. Yeah, 96. To the State Fair of Texas here in Dallas. And right outside the Cotton Bowl, they had a stage set up. There was maybe 200 people watching. There was nobody. Because the Beach Boys weren't even considered a nostalgia act yet by that time. They were just considered over the hill, And Brian Wilson, of course, quit touring with the Beach Boys in the mid to late 60s. He just couldn't do the road. And when they replaced him with the guy that went on to become famous country singer in general, Glenn Campbell, before he was a solo artist. Brian had, unresolved trauma from his childhood and stuff, as I've had and stuff, and he just couldn't do the road anymore. So he stayed home while the Beach Boys went on the road and played their songs. During this time, Brian was very inspired by the Beatles album Rubber Soul. And he just became obsessed with every song on it and everything. He wanted to create something that he felt was like the Beach Boys equivalent to Rubber Soul. So he starts working with session musicians. They were known as the Wrecking Crew. They were the same people. They did the Wrecking Crew did, they were doing everybody's albums in the 60s, especially if you were on Capitol Records. A lot of people are shocked, and I was shocked to find this out when I was younger. It's not shocking to me now. It's just the way it is, but the Monkees and the Beatles, the Monkees and the Beach Boys were the same band. Yeah. As far as like who played on the albums, yeah, the same people. It was the Wrecking Crew, studio musicians. That's who played all the Monkey stuff, and that's who played all the Beach Boys stuff. But it's interesting that they all kind of started trying to move away from that around the same time. This is 66 or so. Stuff was changing a lot in culture and in society. So, the Beach Boys were out on tour doing their, fun, and all those songs. Meanwhile, Brian Wilson's back in L.A. at, what's the name of the studio he recorded at? It's the one Phil Spector did all his stuff at. Anyway, so he's in there working with studio musicians, and they get back from tour, and he's like, I want to play you guys the new album. So he would record all the music with a studio band, and then the Beach Boys would come in, and Brian would write all the harmonies out, and they would lay the harmonies down. And plays them this song, and they start freaking out. They're like, "Oh my God, what are you doing here?" And Brian was tripped out on acid, and I mean, there's no question Brian was MK Ultra. I talk about it in one of my Spellcasters films. I can't remember which one, 3 or 4 or 5. I don't know. I can't remember. But just see all the Spellcasters. How about that? That'll help. Go buy the Spellcasters 9-part series in the download store. It's the best series on mind control MK Ultra. The most, you'll never see a better one. It'll never be done. Anyway, but he thought Phil Spector was out to get him and shit. It was wild. Maybe he was. I don't know. Anyway, so Pet Sounds comes out. And a lot of people don't remember now, because everybody, now loves Pet Sounds. When I first started listening to it, nobody liked it. And when it came out, nobody liked it. It flopped. It was a wet turd when it came out. Because everybody was expecting another fun, or another, Surfing USA or whatever. And then they come out with this very, orchestral, dense, very moody type, album that was just kind of the antithesis of the Beach Boys, but it was amazing, called Pet Sounds. And so Pet Sounds is about to come out, right? And there's like acetates going on. Acetates were like, copies, vinyl copies that were made for like the record label and radio promo and stuff before albums came out. And since the Beatles were also on Capitol Records, just like the Beach Boys were, Lennon and McCartney got a copy of Pet Sounds from their manager, Brian Epstein. And they listened to this album, Pet Sounds, and they had the same reaction that Brian Wilson had to hearing River Soul. They lost their minds. They freaked out. They were like, oh, fuck. We gotta fucking make something like this. We gotta make something close to this. We gotta do something. Shit's changing, and if we don't change along with it, we're gonna get left behind. So that's where, it's not myth. They went immediately in the studio and started recording songs for what would become Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Yeah. So the Beatles inspired the Beach Boys with Rubber Soul. The Beach Boys inspired the Beatles with Pet Sounds. And then Pet Sounds did what it, Pet Sounds flopped. Sgt. Pepper was a huge hit, of course. And guess who else got lost in the mix on that? I mentioned the Monkees earlier. Well, at this same time, the Monkees were going the other way. The Beach Boys were going. They were saying, we're tired of this studio musician shit. We want to play our own shit. And we want to be known as a band that is a real band. So the Monkees went in the studio and recorded this album called Headquarters. It's good. It's a good album. It's a great album, actually. Where they actually, every member of the Monkees is actually playing the instrument. There's no studio people on it whatsoever. The Monkees actually played it. And then, unbeknownst to them, poor Monkees, they finally got to do their own thing. They finally got to record their own album. They finally got to, no studio musicians. We get to show people what we're made of, finally. Comes out the same day Sgt. Pepper comes out. And it just eats a bag of dicks. It flops just right alongside. Pet Sounds before it flopped. The only ones that came out good on that deal were the Beatles, of course, but it's just funny. Anyway, Brian was doing a lot of acid at this time, and he had a lot of unresolved. They didn't have therapy in those days. You didn't just go to a therapist talk therapy wasn't a thing in the 60s yet. People weren't doing that. So, and I've seen this happen firsthand. I've had friends, I have a saying, I always say, listen, the medicine's going to do its job whether you want it to or not. And so what happens is that, because it happened to me too, but I dealt with my shit and got over it. It doesn't fuck with me now, but, when I was younger, I was in my 20s and stuff, 30 years ago, 1995, it was 30 years ago, that was the first time I ever did acid. But during that time, I would, if I got a hold of some acid that was stronger than what I was used to, I would have what I thought was a bad trip. Panic attack, freaking out, anxiety. Turns out it wasn't a bad trip. That's what I thought it was all those years, because that's the only thing I had ever heard was, I'd heard people talk about bad trips. And I just thought that what I was having was that, but it wasn't. The medicine was doing its job. I just didn't know it. I had unresolved trauma bullshit from, childhood abuse and stuff. And I never talked about it or dealt with it, or, But then once I did, all that went away. But that's what happened to Brian. All his unresolved childhood trauma from beatings from his dad and stuff. I mean, his dad beat him partially death. And as horrific as that was, and as it sounds, pressure, it sucks to say it, but pressure makes diamonds. I mean, that what happened to Brian is what ended up making him great, making him be able to do the beautiful things he did. But then after that, they tried to do the album Smiley, or it was supposed to be called Smile originally. They ended up coming up with one called Smiley Smile later, which was an unfinished version of it. And then he finished it decades later or something. But what happened with that was, they started making the follow-up, and Brian was doing lots of acid still. And they were doing this song called Fire. And Brian wanted to set a vibe in the studio while they were recording this song. And so they got a bucket, trash can or something, and they set some paper on fire in it. Just to have a vibe of fire in the recording studio. It's so way you only be on acid to do this kind of shit. And then he had fireman's hats that he wore and made all the band members wear fireman's hats while this paper's burning in this trash bin in the studio with these sirens going off in the song while they're recording the song Fire. And as they're doing this, an apartment complex down the street caught fire and a bunch of people died. Yeah. And Brian heard about it, and it wigged. It was like the final straw. It just snapped him in two. He thought that they had invoked that by what they were doing in the studio with the fire and anyway. Yeah, and so that was kind of and so Brian kind of stayed on I'm not going to tell the whole Brian Wilson story yet. I'll make a documentary, but that was what really led to the downfall, and then the Beach Boys just kept going and adding other members and different stuff like that. The Beach Boys stuff in the 70s when Brian wasn't even on, in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, Holland, 2020, Surf's Up, Sunflower. I mean, there's some fucking amazing records and some amazing music that I'll put up against a lot of the Beatles' later stuff. Yeah. Beach Boys did some stuff, even after Brian wasn't really involved as much, that is as good as anything the Beatles did. They really did. It's incredible. But I was talking to my friend earlier that got me into the Beach Boys. I went to go see the Beach Boys, 1996, Fair Park here in Dallas, right where they have the state fair, right outside the Cotton Bowl Stadium. And Dennis Wilson was still alive, the bass player and singer, Brian's brother. Dennis Wilson was still alive. Not Dennis Wilson was dead. Carl Wilson was still alive. Carlson was still alive. John Stamos was on congas. Yeah, seriously. John Stamos was on and an unexpected guest came out and did a few songs. Brian Wilson. Yeah. So the first time I got to see the Beach Boys in 1996, I got to see them with two of the three Wilson brothers. Yeah. It was incredible. It really, getting their music changed me because I was such a guitar rock guy. You know, I mean, I started playing guitar in 92. And, you know, all the music I was listening to up until maybe Nirvana. Nirvana was the band that made me feel like I could do it. It made a lot of people feel that way. It wasn't just me, but just for me personally, they were the first band where I went. Because Nirvana did that. That was what a lot of people missed about Nirvana. You know, whether you like their music or not is relevant. The fact of the matter is, Nirvana, what they did is they showed a bunch of punk teenagers like myself that, guess what? You gotta be Rush. You gotta be Led Zeppelin. You can do this. Just pick up the guitar, make some noise, and start a band. And, you know, all the other bands I'd listened to up to that point, Queen and Rush and those guys, you know, you never felt from listening to Rush or Queen or, you know, you never felt like, yeah, I can do that. You know, you never felt like, yeah, give me a shot. Yeah, you know, I didn't at least. Maybe some people did. I didn't. I never felt from listening to Rush, oh, yeah, I can do that. I can be in Rush. Yeah, no. But Nirvana, you know, it was three chords and the truth, you know, as they say. You know, it was, and I really was inspired by that, you know. But when I first started playing guitar, I started, you know, learning how to play and being in bands and stuff. It was a weird time in music, you know. 93, 94 was a weird time in music because the butt rock era of the 80s, you know, the hair metal and the butt rock era was over. And grunge and alternative was kicking butt. But by about... it wasn't long after I saw the Beach Boys the first time, 96. By about 97, because I had a band I started in 94, I disbanded it in 96. After we got sabotaged the night we were supposed to get signed to a record label. At the same place where Kurt Cobain got hit by the guy and chaos ensued. It was at that same exact club. That place just cursed. Still there, but the only thing, the Nirvana and the whole grunge thing for me personally was a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing in what I said previously, you know, it just showed me, hey, you can do it. Just go start a band. So that's what I did. But there wasn't a premium during that time in music. There wasn't a premium placed on being a good musician at that time. It was all about functional musicianship. You know, so when I first started learning guitar, I wasn't trying to... A lot of people I knew they were learning how to play guitar. They were trying to learn how to play like Eddie Van Halen or trying to learn how to play like Yngwie Malmsteen or, you know, fucking some shredder or something, you know. And that wasn't me. I like to listen to that stuff, but I didn't want to be that type of guitar player. I just wanted to write songs. So... It worked against me in the fact that I should have been taking the time to become a better musician instead of jumping right into starting a band. But that came later. So, after I got into the Beach Boys, this was in the late 90s, I started teaching myself how to play keyboards. Piano, whatever keyboard I could find at a pawn shop, whatever, synthesizer, which I would just end up playing, Subdivisions by Rush or the opening synth line to Jump by Van Halen over and over again. But it led me to learning how to play, and it was around that time that I first started trying to think about music and writing songs beyond just the guitar. Where oh, wait a minute. You can have the same song with the same chords and make it sound nothing like it sounds like you're just playing the chords out on a guitar. I mean, Sloop John B by the Beach Boys, that wasn't their song. It was the Kingston Trio. It was an old folk song from the Bahamas. And the Kingston Trio did a version of it, and then the Beach Boys did their version. But I can't remember what my point was. I don't know why I brought that up. My memory's getting bad, y'all. I'm turning 49 in July, so I kind of feel like the cognitive decline is already starting to begin for me. My long-term memory's great. I mean, I can tell you the set list of a band I saw 30 years ago, no problem. But I can't tell you what I was going to do 3 seconds ago. Yeah, that's not good. Look at the old cognitive decline might be coming after your boy already. Oh, it's not cool. Not cool at all. But, anyway, I started learning how to play keyboards and stuff because I wanted to start trying to create some music that wasn't just strictly relegated to being written and played on a guitar. And that was, absolutely the influence of Brian Wilson. It absolutely was. And, I wanted to be Brian Wilson. I really did. You just prepare, and I sent this picture earlier to my brothers from 2001. You ever go look at the picture of Brian Wilson on the cover of Pet Sounds. He's got like this blue, this black, it's like I don't know what you call it, a blazer or jacket or something with gold buttons on it. And I found one in a thrift shop back in 2000, 2001 or something. And man, I thought I was Brian Wilson. I wore that fucking thing everywhere. Summertime, didn't matter. 115 degrees outside, had that fucking jacket on. It probably stunk, Oh man, it's just funny. That's just how far his influence went with me, because I had, done acid and listened to Pet Sounds for the first time and felt like I really got it. There's a song on there. There's a song on Pet Sounds called I Know There's an Answer. I know there's an answer. But that wasn't the original lyrics. Brian changed it. Because Mike Love, chode that he is, lead singer of the Beach Boys, the guy's a fucking chode, never liked that guy. I saw him back in 1999 in the Clinton era, and something came up, and Mike Lowe's on go, "Our president," and shooting the middle finger, talking to Bill Clinton. He was a hardcore right winger, and I was just like, "How is the dude that went to India with the Beatles a hardcore right winger?" I was like 23. It's 99, So. Now, I think he's like Elon. He just wants to be on the winning team. Now, Mike Lowe is no longer a right winger. Now, he's ultra left woke. I can't say I saw that one coming. Jesus Christ, but he's always been a turd. I never liked Mike Love. I mean, I like him for the Beach Boys, but, you know, he served his part in that. But outside that, psh, get the fuck out of here. But, I really do owe it to Brian Wilson that I don't think I would have become a multi-instrumentalist. And I don't think I would be able to do the music that I do in the score with these films that I make had it not been for him. Because he was the first guy that I listened to that got me thinking about music beyond just making it with a guitar. And it really completely changed me as a musician forever. It was just what I needed after I had kind of ignored proper musicianship because of Nirvana and that whole era where, you know, there was no premium placed on being a good musician. There wasn't at all. So, yeah, I guess that's what I'm sad about. I mean, he was, 82 or whatever, he's an old guy. Had dementia. He had a good long life. I think I was just more sad about his death because I was reminded. The same thing happened to me when Neil Peart from Rush died in 2020. Of course I was sad the person died, same then, but more it was the profound influence both those guys had on me musically. It really, really reminded me. And so when I had a fucking dream that I'm talking to Brian Wilson, telling him that you should let me be in the Beach Boys and I'll sing your brother's parts. He put out an album. Brian Wilson put out an album in '99 called Imagination. It was a solo album. It was the first time he'd really worked with, and done an album on a big, huge board, digital recording, unlimited tracks and stuff. And I had a video. It was like Imagination. It was VHS. It was for the album Imagination. So it had a bunch of behind the scenes of him in the studio recording the tracks and stuff. And he was talking about, this blew me away. At this point, Carl had been dead a year or two, not very long. And Dennis died in the early 80s. But this was like 99. And he was talking about how whenever he writes harmonies for recording now, or even when he's writing, like when he's doing a solo album, when he's recording himself, when he writes the harmonies out and he writes the parts out, he still would write them as if he was writing them for his brothers. He would say, okay, this is Carl's part. Okay, this is Dennis's part. And then he would sing all three parts because his brothers weren't around anymore. But, I don't know. So I remember, I was like 4 when John Lennon died. But I remember it. I mean, everybody was crying. Even like my grandparents, older adults that didn't even like the Beatles and probably were talking shit about them, calling them devil music when they first came out. They were crying too. It just really affected everybody. But I was 4 at the time, and I never even heard the Beatles, and, I didn't get it. I remember going, what's everybody fucking crying about? I remember thinking that. As a kid, 4 years old, going, I didn't get it. I didn't get why everybody universally was upset that this guy died. And then when Kurt Cobain died, I got it because I had seen Nirvana twice. They were my generation, I saw them in a club first, and I saw them in an arena on the In Utero tour. But it was one of those moments for me when I went, oh, now I get why everybody was crying when I was a kid when John Lennon died. It made sense to me in that moment. But yeah, Brian Wilson, man. I mean, he I can't say enough. He just really, for me, single-handedly showed me that I could make music beyond just what you can make with a guitar. And I am forever grateful to him for that. I don't think I would have ever got there had I not got into the Beach Boys. And it really opened me up musically, and I'm just, sad he's gone. Rest in peace, Brian Wilson. He made some of the most beautiful music that's ever been made or will be made, and man. And I've talked about this before. I'm going to talk about it again. Don't get it twisted now. All right, because like I said before, I 100% Brian Wilson was MK Ultra. There's no question about it. And, we already know Charles Manson was MK Ultra. And the Beach Boys got all wrapped up in that. I mean, you know what's crazy? It still blows my mind and shows you that whole thing was the CIA op. In the fact that Charles Manson accused the Beach Boys of stealing his song. And Doris Day's son, Terry Melcher, who worked with the Beach Boys, a producer, worked with the Byrds and Parvia and the Raiders and a bunch of bands. Terry Melcher was seen as the guy. He was identified as the guy who was responsible for the Beach Boys. For the accusation from Manson was the Beach Boys. Here's the thing, though. They did. That's what gets. I put that in one of my Spellcast movies, but that's the thing that I don't think ever gets talked about enough when it comes to the Charles Manson and the Beach Boys thing. Because again, he went to the house to murder Terry Melcher, right? CeeLo Drive. Terry Melcher had moved out; he wasn't there anymore, and then, the rest of the story. That's how the whole Manson murder went down. He went there. He sent the family there to murder Terry Melcher for putting I don't know what you want to call it, putting the things in motion that led to the Beach Boys. Because the fact of the matter is, the Beach Boys did steal his song. That doesn't get talked about enough. The whole reason why Manson did that is because his accusation was the Beach Boys stole his song, and they did. It's on the 2020 album from 1969. It's called, what's it called? Never Learn Not to Love. That's it. Yeah, Never Learn Not to Love. And if you look on the album, they may have since changed, I don't know, but on the album, if you get an original copy of the vinyl, and you look on the liner notes, and you look at the songs, and you look at Never Learn Not to Love, it's credited to Beach Boys members. Charles Manson's name doesn't appear on there. Well, how, I've told the story. You know how the story works. So, Tex Avery, who was from right here where I live, he was from outside Dallas, McKinney, Texas, which is a huge, sprawling suburb now. It's a small town forever when I was growing up and stuff, but that's where Tex Avery was from. Dennis Wilson picked up a hitchhiker one day. That hitchhiker he picked up was Tex Avery. He introduced Dennis Wilson, drummer for the Beach Boys, to the Manson family, and then, and then they started all hanging out. The whole Manson family were like staying at Dennis Wilson's mansion. They were like squatting there for the longest time, and he tried to get rid of them, and they wouldn't leave, and they said it was their house now, and all this crazy shit. And then the Beach Boys actually recorded some demos with Manson. And the thing about it, it was all right. His songwriting's all right, but he was not a good singer. But the thing about it is, you could just tell. Just when you hear the guy sing, you could just tell when you hear him sing, okay, this guy's got a few screws loose. And of course, he'd been experimented on by MK Ultra with acid. He was into that whole thing too. So the fact that Brian Wilson had these acid-induced things happen to him, it's no secret, right? Now, all that stuff was there together. But the fact of the matter to me of the whole thing, again, it doesn't get talked about enough. It's the Manson murders were committed because the Beach Boys were accused of stealing Charles Manson's song, and they did it. They actually did. That's what's fucked up about it. I mean, but none of the Beach Boys were ever, I'm not saying they should have been, but I'm just saying, none of the Beach Boys caught any, they didn't catch anything for that. They were never sued or assigned any blame for that. But really, if you want to boil it down to it, really the Beach Boys caused the Manson murders. Today they would probably try them under being complicit, after the fact or something, but they were. They just thought this guy was some crazy off the street homeless guy. They brought him in because Dennis wanted to do some demos with him and told Manson he would help him get a record deal. They recorded these demos in the Beach Boys brothers studio in Los Angeles, and nobody wanted it. Clearly, nobody wanted it. Caliber Records didn't want it. Nobody wanted anything to do it. But the Beach Boys were like, hey, this one song's pretty good. We could record this fucking song, put it on our album. Who the fuck's gonna know? This fucking straggly, hippie, burnout fucking guy named Charles? Ain't nobody gonna fucking listen to him. He's crazier than a shithouse rat. Who cares? Let's just fucking do the song. We wrote it on the album, and fucking ain't nobody ever gonna know the difference. Well, one person knows the difference. Charles Manson. And that's what led to the murders. Yeah, so, I mean, as much as I love the Beach Boys, y'all, I just can't let that fucking go. The Beach Boys are just as responsible for the Manson murders as Manson was. Yes, Manson may have given the order, but he would never have given the order for those people on CeeLo Drive to be murdered had the Beach Boys not recorded his song on their 2020 album in 1969 and taken all the credit for it. I don't know, man. I can't just fucking turn a blind eye to that and let that one go, even though I love the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys are as responsible for those deaths as the Manson family. Unfortunately. It's just the truth. The only thing I've never heard, and I think because they haven't said is why I haven't heard. They've never said. Probably a good reason, but they never really gave specifics on who gave the green light on that. You know what I mean? Like, whose decision was it to take this song, Never Learn Not to Love? It's a great song, by the way. It's a great recording by the Beach Boys. But whose decision was it to take this song, not give credit to Charles Manson? I mean, what I understand, it was a band decision by all the members, but it had to be... It had to come down to Mike Love and Brian Wilson, I would think. I was talking about it earlier. I don't think I finished what my point on what I was saying, but on Pet Sounds, there's a song called I Know There's an Answer. Right, but that wasn't the original version. The original version was called Hang On to Your Ego. Instead of going, I know there's an answer, it would go, hang on to your ego. And it was, a song about psychedelics. ego death being one of the things that happens when you take high dosages of mushrooms or psychedelics and things. So that was the whole theme of the song, Hang On to Your Ego. Well, Mike Love was uptight and he didn't take drugs, and he refused to sing a song that he thought was an acid song. So they changed the lyrics and turned it into the lame, I Know There's an Answer. I mean, it's still a good song, but when you can go listen to the original on YouTube. Go listen to that Hang On to Your Ego by the Beach Boys, and then listen to the actual version, I Know There's an Answer. I mean, I like it way better. But man, don't get it twisted. The Beach Boys abso-fucking-lutely should have shared some responsibility in the deaths of Sharon Tate and others at CeeLo Drive there in Los Angeles, because none of that shit would have happened. Because the way they frame it in most documentaries is they just say, like, oh, Charles Manson was crazy and he accused the Beach Boys of trying to steal his music. And then they play a clip of Charlie Manson singing, right? So that you go, oh, listen to that fucking Looney Tune. Why would a great band like the Beach Boys want to steal his music? They don't mention, okay, they actually did steal his song, Never Learn Not to Love. It's on the album 2020. You can see the album credits where there doesn't say written by, it just has the last names, and Charles Manson's name's not on there. Only Beach Boys' names are on there. So, I mean, my take on that is that the reason none of the Beach Boys were ever reprimanded on that can only be because Brian Wilson and possibly others within the Beach Boys and the Beach Boys themselves, and probably the Wilson brothers' father, Murray Wilson, who used, trauma-based mind control, like the worst kind of stage mom, to whip the boys into shape to become the Beach Boys. I mean, they were all involved in MK Ultra, I think. All of them. And that's the reason why the Beach Boys were never, they were reprimanded for any involvement in the deaths of Sharon Tate and the others who died at CeeLo Drive. But they absolutely should have been. Because again, the whole motivation for what Manson had the family do there was the accusation. But anytime they talk about that accusation in most documentaries that aren't conspiracy documentaries on the subject, they try to make it seem like the accusation that the Beach Boys stole Manson's music wasn't true, or was just some crazy thing Manson thought they did. Not the case, y'all. Not the case. The Beach Boys legitimately stole that motherfucker's music, and they were not reprimanded for it at all. That's fucking weird. That smells like a fucking derived plan of MK Ultra. We know Manson was MK Ultra. They were giving him acid while he was in jail. And I think the Beach Boys were absolutely a part of that. I mean, we know, as I exposed in Spellcasters and Follow the Movie and all that stuff. That goes back to the fake Paul McCartney thing. That's what the whole fake Paul McCartney thing was about. That's why they fucking got rid of the original Paul. He assumed the identity of another person, became another person from another band. I talk about that in Follow the Movie. And they replaced him with another guy, Billy Shears from Scotland. Well, that was the whole reason. And in the Rolling Stones, I think it was their manager, one of the long term, it was from a book. I covered it in Spellcaster series. Talked about how every band in those days had a CIA person that was put in charge of pushing drugs on their audience to other musicians, and the original Paul wouldn't go along with it. But because he was aware of the plans and what was going on, he knew too much, so he had to go. But instead of murdering him, they changed his identity, changed his look, plastic surgery, everything, and he became this other guy who wasn't a known musician yet at the time, but is there while they're recording the White Album, which is just fucking weird. The guy who went on to become a famous musician, who was not a famous musician yet, the original Paul became, was at the sessions for the White Album, which was the first album that featured the replacement Paul. Yeah, okay. See what I'm saying? Weird shit. Anyway. All that stuff. The Beatles, the Beach Boys, all that. Manson, it was all Tavistock and CIA, MI6, CIA joint operation. And the Canadian government was involved in well. I cover all that in my Spellcaster series. Yeah. It's fucking wild. Anyway. Rest in peace, Brian Wilson. You know, a few years ago, I started writing a Beach Boys documentary. And I abandoned it because I just went, this ain't happening. This just ain't happening. Bro, you have any idea how long it would take me to make a Beach Boys documentary? Not how long it would take me to make it. Do you have any idea how long the film would have to be? I mean, you ever seen the Beatles anthology? I remember when that came out, it was like fucking 20 VHS tapes or something. It would have to be something like that. I just gave up on it because I was like, this is not happening. I'm not going to make the fucking 10 film series on the Beach Boys. And that's what it would take. So I just abandoned that. I was looking back through some of my writings today. I was like, you know, there is some good stuff in here. Maybe I should take some of this and repurpose this at some point into just a documentary on Brian Wilson, not just exclusively on the Beach Boys, you know. So, yeah, I mean, with his death today, it really definitely showed me I got to do that. Hey, I put out another music documentary this week. It's called Motorhead Rock the World. It's a great music documentary. It's only $8. Get a copy of it. Dayglow76 at yahoo.com, on PayPal. Reeves Radio, all lowercase, one word. Reeves Radio on the Cash App. Capital J Josh dash capital R Reeves dash 61 on Venmo 7894. If it asks you for the last 4 digits. I'd like to close out the show with a prayer. Dear Lord, we have to raise $700 to not go under. That's all I'm not on the street. I spent the last 18 years doing what you put me here to do, Lord. Not everybody finds what to put here to do, but I did, and that's all I've ever tried to do. I've never asked you to make me rich. I've never asked you to make me famous. All I ever want is just to be able to continue your work in your name, Lord. Just please bless everyone that's in a position of power, that could be in a position to bless me, dear Lord, so they can bless me and we can reach this goal by tomorrow and stay alive. Amen. I love you guys. You got to act or it's over. If you don't hear a show from me on Friday or see any, like a new movie or a new video or something on YouTube posted, it means the worst has happened and you got to donate, contribute, and buy downloads, all right?